So just to start things off, I will say that I am here on behalf of Oklahoma Humanities to celebrate the 50th anniversary with Martin Wing. Hello, good afternoon. How are you doing today?
I'm very good, thanks. How are you?
I'm doing pretty well, aside from the technological, troubles that we've had a little bit of. To start things off, I like to usually get a feeling of someone's, upbringing in their education process, some like highlights and stuff like that. If you just want to run us through, like, how your family or you got to Tulsa, what your education was like. I saw that you were a graduate of Rice in Columbia. If you want to talk about that just a little bit, just open floor.
Well, let me begin a little bit by saying that I was from a family where no one had ever graduated from college on my paternal side, only a uncle by marriage on my mother's side. And I grew up in the north side of Tulsa, which is the poor neighborhood. And because my father was on the ground floor of Sabre at American Airlines, even though he never graduated from college, he had 1 year at OSU. Um, we kept advancing economically and moving south periodically. And one of the things I experienced as we moved south was that I was a little behind because the quality of the education system was better as we moved south, and I had to catch up, and I did, of course. And I like to use the example that I was a National Merit Scholar, one of 7 in the city. 6 of them were from Tulsa Edison, a public school. One was from Nathan Hale High School, a public school, and I was in the Nathan Hale system and was, I do not think, the best student in the entire class. And I don't think I would have had the opportunity to get into a private university of the quality of Rice had I not moved, had my family not moved south. So I think that taught me a lesson about the importance of education in the humanities, which I took with me. And I was at Rice 3 years and was selected in a program called the Accelerated Interdisciplinary Legal Education Program to get automatically qualified to enter into matriculate to Columbia. So I skipped a year, and I did not have my undergraduate degree until after my 2nd year in law school. And in the 2nd year, I did graduate work at Columbia in my undergraduate majors, which were history and political science. So I did the whole thing in 6 instead of 7 years. And I don't say that to brag, but simply it was just the way it worked out. It was confusing to employers who saw that I had a undergraduate degree in 1 year and then a law school degree in the very next year, as if I did it all in 1 year when I did the combined in 6 instead of 7. But I did have graduate level work when I was at Columbia Law School, which was really beneficial, I think, in a lot of ways. It convinced me that my real avocation was as an educator and historian. But of course, I was trained as a lawyer. And I considered staying in New York City, had offers to do that. But my local law firm, which was, I think, the best in Oklahoma, still is in my view, really recruited me hard, and I came. And I worked very, very, very hard. But after 5 years, I was pretty burnt out. And I decided I wanted to pursue that graduate history degree. And so I applied then to Yale. I applied several places, but I ended up taking the offer at Yale. And I did a year up there in graduate work, focusing on early modern English history. And I won a prize as the best graduate student, but economically, the oil and gas investments that I thought supported me had fallen apart. So I came back to my law firm on a part-time basis to work. And I stayed over, and after the summer and the fall, Yale said, you need to come back, commit to come back, or you'll have to reapply. You'll get in. I mean, they were very frank about it. We want you back. But I had also, by this time, experienced what I would call genteel poverty, which you may be familiar with as a graduate student. I had been a lawyer making a nice salary, and then I was not making a salary. And I had to make a decision about my path. And my law firm said, we want you to stay as well. We'd like to make you a partner. And I did. But I made a compromise at that time. I said, I'm going to continue to stay involved in the humanities and in history, And I did. I taught at Tulsa, then Tulsa Junior College, now Tulsa Community College, as an adjunct instructor in both American history before and after 1845. You know, the old dichotomy that like Civil War is the only thing that matters in American history. And I also taught political science, which was really fascinating because I learned very soon that many of my students who were, you know, from middle-class homes, I was teaching in the Southeast campus, you know, a wealthier part of the city, a less diverse part of the city. They didn't know how to write an essay. They didn't know how to compose a sentence, a topic sentence. They sometimes wouldn't answer true-false questions if they didn't know the answer. I had to tell them to guess. They had a 50% shot at getting it right. So I continued on this path of being both a full-time lawyer and working. I also taught part-time at the University of Tulsa Law School and legal method and writing and appellate advocacy. And I quickly realized that this was not sustainable for me. So I segued out of teaching, but in the interim, I was recruited by folks who knew me and knew my background to be involved in humanities projects. I helped start the Chautauqua program in Tulsa. My good friend Marilyn Inhofe Tucker introduced me to the head of the history department at the University of Tulsa, and they asked me to form a board of visitors, which I did. And that was successful. And then they asked me to form the board of visitors for the College of Arts and Sciences, which I did. And I also went on to the Arts and Humanities Council of Tulsa. So I was doing all of these things, and you know, and TU gave me a nice little award for my work. And then someone suggested that maybe I would be interested in the Oklahoma Humanities Council. You know, would I consider being a member, because I'd had all this experience in the humanities, and I said that would be great. So I had not yet learned that I needed to say no to opportunities to be involved. And I enjoyed my experience with the Oklahoma Humanities Council, and sort of after a period of time, taking various office positions, was the chair. And I was there off and on per our bylaws that I helped rewrite to give myself time off for over 10 years. And then I left again and was asked to come back to help with the search committee, which I chaired, when the long-standing, extremely valued Anita May retired after 25 plus years. And I helped select not the current, but the most recent, before the current director, Ann Thompson, as our new leader. And she stayed with the Humanities Council for, I don't know, a decade or so. I never came back. Well, I'm sorry. I did agree to chair the council for my first term after she came on, to provide continuity. After that, I segued off, and I indicated, you know, I've done my time. And I'm a strong believer that organizations must survive on their own, through their own mission and strength. And the continuity of the board is important, but that a cult of personality with one person always being there as the leader is not a way you establish a strong organization. So partly my reason of not coming back was selfish, because I needed more time to do things and have my own life. But beyond that, it was also, I mean, a truly philosophical position that it was time for me to let someone else do it. And it was not my organization. It was the organization of the people of the state of Oklahoma, and I needed to back off. So that is a long, short version of my educational history and how I got involved in the humanities. And I still feel involved today. I still donate. I read the fabulous magazine and send comments back in from time to time. You know, and I still chair the board of visitors. I don't chair it anymore. I'm on the board of visitors of the University of Tulsa board of visitors for the College of Arts and Sciences, which includes humanities. So I learn about what some professors are doing through those experiences. So you can ask me whatever you want. I mean, there's a lot more there, but that's a lot to digest, I think.
Oh yeah, I think that's a very like well-bodied skeleton of information to build upon, to be honest. It seems you have a lot of experience in regards to boards and stuff. Were you the brain behind creating the board of visitors at TU? Do you have like the origin story behind that, or was it just something that you were asked to be a part of?
Well, no, the origin story was I was asked to assemble a board for the College of Art, for the history department first. And I, I mean, I reached out to people I knew in the community through other organizations because I was pro-choice and sort of known to be progressive. I hardly like to use the L word, liberal, anymore because it's so castigated. But I worked my way through Planned Parenthood locally and ended up chairing that briefly for a period of time, which was interesting because I'm single and I've never been, I have been married, but much later in my life. And really, so I had the organizational experience of how that board worked. I was on the OOHRP Humanities Council board. I saw how it worked or did not work. And so I assembled this group and we created projects where professors would do public lectures for the community that we would ask them to focus on. We also, through one of our folks on the board, we organized a couple of tours to historical sites. So those were some of our activities. And during this time, I was doing a lot of work for the Philbrick Museum of Art here in Tulsa, because one of our senior partners controlled that work and was on the board. And he again saw that I had an interest in arts and humanities and kept me working in that area. And I did a lot of work with the board at Philbrick and eventually succeeded to being the general counsel of Philbrick, which I've done for probably 25 years now. So I had seen how other boards worked. And so that's why I was asked to organize the history board. When it came to the College of Boards of Arts and Sciences, I needed help because I needed to reach out past just pure humanities folks, because that College of Arts and Sciences encompasses music, theater, gosh, I can't remember all the various things that were under the rubric of arts and sciences. Many of them still are. And I reached out to my clients and my community members and I assembled a board. And really, I relied on the dean of the college to provide the content. We'd have at least one spring lunch and a fall lunch and bring a professor to talk about a topic, and we would tour on site. And the purpose of that board was really to create community connection and community knowledge about what was happening. And of course, these boards are always interested in funds. You know, one of the things they do is they hook you in because of an interest you have, and then they want you to donate. And I had the means as a practicing lawyer to do that. And I think that was appreciated. So these are not pure fundraising boards. And I'm on other boards now. And some boards emphasize more input, content, and direction to the organization. Other boards emphasize more support financially and emotionally. So
It seems you have a myriad of boards just in your like resume and experience. How does one taking a step further back from creating your own board? You mentioned that you reached out to people that you had known. Like, is it through your work or is it through like your private engagements and social spheres that you got to know all these people to create all of these boards, or was it sort of a mutual experience where people reach out to you based on your proficiencies and stuff?
well, it actually is interesting that you asked that question. One of my partners, his wife, and I mentioned her name already, Marilyn Van Inhofe, and they're distantly related to Senator Jim Inhofe, but they're on I would like to call it the Democratic side of the family. They're not necessarily supporters of Jim, but she saw what I like to do, and she got to know me, and she's the one who propelled me towards meeting people And, you know, I even though I had grown up in Tulsa, I was not in the circles of the people that I was meeting that I would invite. Um, my law firm was very focused on community involvement. One of my mentors, Henry Will, now retired, was the board chair of the Tulsa Symphony, then now Philharmonic, the Tulsa Opera. You know, the reason I got involved with Planned Parenthood was because John Athens, also deceased, was a board chair, one of my partners. My late tax partner that I studied under, Bob McGowan, was the head of the ACLU in Oklahoma. And my firm was, one of the things that I liked about it was that there were opportunities that, other than going to play golf in a country club, I don't know how to put this politely, it was not just about, you know, joining the Republican Men's Club, that kind of thing. And while we had people of completely diverse political views, and we still do, there's never been an ethos that requires you to have a particular set of views to be a partner in our firm, except doing good work. So yes, I mean, the answer to that is it was through my connections created from my work that I had these opportunities. I mean, I never dreamed as a kid. I was toured through Philbrook, you know, when I was in elementary school, and I was amazed that people lived in such beautiful circumstances at one time, and about Tulsa's oil wealth, and just thrilled to be there. And I also remember back when music education was part of the Tulsa public schools, you know, hearing the music teacher, fourth, fifth grade, you know, play classical music, so we could hear the galloping horses in the beginning of the Valkyria, the Act 3, and then going to see the symphony at the old lady at Brady, as it used to be called. Brady Tate was a Ku Klux Klan member, so we've renamed a lot of these buildings and streets in the so-called arts district now. Going there and hearing the symphony play the stuff that I had heard on the piano. And my father, I am a pianist as well. My father was a gospel pianist, played gospel trios. We were fundamentalist Pentecostals, if that tells you something about my background. I'm not a Pentecostal nowadays, as you might suspect, but I had a love of music through that experience. Still do. I still respect gospel and roots music.
Yeah, it seems like there's a hand in hand with the music and the humanities, even though it's not like a performative art. The humanities tends to have a big appreciation for, you know, any sort of performance art.
Well, I will say this: the study of music and music history is a humanities. So, you know, you can turn almost anything into humanities you want to.
It really, I mean, in doing all these interviews, it seems to be one of the recurring things is a lot of times, and I will ask you this later on, so you can prepare now, but I, you know, tend to ask, what is the humanities? And the fundamental answer just seems to be a relationship between two people and how to view it. And I'm like, no, that's concise. Moving towards Oklahoma Humanities, you said someone reached out to you to see if you would want to be involved in that, and you just hadn't, you know, formulated in your brain a way to say no to that. Like, what was the beginning of that relationship?
Yeah, well, that was I believe that was the late Larry Kress, who was the dean of the history department at TU. You know, once you show a proficiency in these kinds of things, you have some other things to offer, like being a lawyer, because lawyers are always good board members. Everyone wants free legal work and advice. You know, once you show proficiency, people want to ship you around. And I've cautioned some of our younger lawyers who are community activists. I said, you know, be careful, you're liable to get overwhelmed, because I did get overwhelmed. But Larry Kress, the dean of the TU Law School, was on the Oklahoma Humanities Board, and he was segueing off. And one of the Oklahoma Humanities Board always wanted diverse representation, not just in our backgrounds, but in the 77 counties of the state. And Tulsa has, in my view, been underrepresented, and it appears to be currently underrepresented as well. But I haven't talked to anyone about that, because it's not my problem anymore. But I was asked to take his place. And I was really honored, because it was a statewide board. And you know, and it has a unique relationship. It's not a state agency. It is funded partially through the National Endowment for the Humanities, but it's not an NEH branch. It is an independent C3. that is charitable organization, which gets support from the public as well as the NEH, from time to time, support from the state government, but not like the Oklahoma Arts Council, which is a state agency. It's a really interesting, unique hybrid organization. So that's how I got started. I was asked to take someone's place.
Sort of like fill the role that was being vacated by a former
Yeah,
mentor.
I was designated Tulsan for that.
Yeah. The token Tulsan of the council.
The token Tulsan. I can, I'm a token in other ways too. I'm actually openly gay, and my late husband and I were fortunate enough to be married before he got cancer and passed away in 2017. So
my condolences, but also.
So thank you. Well, it's been a while now, but it's still tough.
Oh, I can only imagine. What did the Oklahoma Humanities look like upon your arrival there, and how do you think you changed it during your time there?
Well, I think the board was a bit smaller than it may be now. What I wanted to do, first of all, was find out how it worked, because it was probably 5 years or so before I was asked to chair. The most interesting thing to me, and one of those life lessons which always humbles one, is to not think that there isn't great education going on everywhere. I got to meet the most wonderful professors from the various branches, not Stillwater and Norman, but the various branches of Oklahoma State University throughout the state. And of course, there are all kinds of issues and questions about consolidation and what would be efficient. But I was consistently amazed because, I'd done graduate work at Yale. I knew smart people. I worked with, very important historian professors. And it opened my eyes to the possibility of, experiencing things in rural areas that I had thought were only available in urban areas. And one of the things that I wanted to do, and I know that there have been changing focuses in the programming, we really worked hard to get our library programs into small cities. We worked hard to support the Chautauqua moving around the state, although it's now independent and on its own. And when we used to review grants as a board. When we reviewed grants, I always kept in mind, are we making sure that we're treating this part of the state fairly? Is there something in Southeast Oklahoma and not in Northwest Oklahoma? So it allowed me to have, because I grew up with an animus towards Oklahoma City. Sorry if you're from there, but I got rid of it. I learned pretty soon that was stupid. And I actually began to really appreciate the vitality and strength of our rural areas in a way that I had never done before. So I think how I tried to shape the board was to make sure that we were responsive to the entire state, because that was our mission. And maybe that's what every board chair does. But back in the days when I was board chair, we would divide into small groups to discuss the proposals that were submitted for funding. I didn't participate in the small groups because I was the board chair, and I was not to, in my view, influence the decision of the board. Okay, so the only time I ever voted was when we had a tie, and I did have to break a couple of ties. And I really tried hard to make sure that everyone on the board was heard and that we vetted it. Now, there were many proposals that were almost virtually unanimous or near unanimously voted on. I don't think the current board does this anymore. And it was, in fact, a really tremendous burden on the board to review these things, because we all had to review upwards of 30 proposals for our proposal meeting and spend a half day in Oklahoma City in a room with a break for lunch doing this stuff. On the other hand, it was a lot of fun. And I got to see what kind of scholarship was being promoted, really unique, interesting things. And, it's funny, back in those days, I can remember the first time we had a tribal proposal, and I thought, well, this is fascinating. Of course, the tribes are doing things, but, do they need our money as opposed to federal money? And so we began to think about diversity in a kind of different way, not just geographic, but in terms of socioeconomic, cultural, racial, and so it was a period of time when I think my horizons as a thinker were being expanded. And that was, I think, the most gratifying thing about word service to me, was that it kept me connected with intellectual things, but it also helped push me out of my own little bubble and to learn what others were doing. And that may sound like so incredibly obvious now in a board, but it wasn't back then. I mean, I think I can't remember what the dates showed here, the 80s. When did I do this? I had this pulled up, and of course my other computer has gone inactive, of course, and it'll take a while. I'm not gonna bother to try to get it back on. But you know, it was just interesting to see the board expand its horizons, and not to be involved in what I would call social uplift at every single moment. You know, the origin of humanities boards like this, I think, goes back to local community uplift organizations, you know, ladies with tea, trying to make sure that the society is elevated in its morals and character, and that's not what we do nowadays, I think.
Yeah, I think it's come a little farther than that in the 50 years. You mentioned going back, I made a few notes I'd like to touch on from your last little answer. Consolidation and efficiency of rural universities. Is that something that you've noticed in like the last few years as universities start to try and focus more on efficiency, they try to consolidate locations or anything?
Well, that's really a political state legislature kind of question. No, I haven't seen much of it happening at all. What I have seen is increasing access to community colleges, you know, and Tulsa, I think through the generosity of the Kaiser Foundation, TCC is free to anyone who graduates from a Tulsa high school or an area high school, maybe it's Broken Arrow, Jinx, et cetera. And I think lowering barriers to affordable education is, my gosh, what more important goal could the humanities have than to do that? And, you know, and then to allow those students after, you know, 2 years or so to transfer into our flagship state universities, or to a regional state university, or to a private university. I mean, I think there is, because of my involvement with the University of Tulsa, I know that good TCC students are very eagerly desired, desirable. So.
Yeah, that's really interesting. Yeah, I've a native Stillwaterian here. I have a few friends from Tulsa, and they talk about their time at TCCC, and I'm like, that's a really good program. It sounds like a nice little, you know, transition to the academic system.
Well, let me stop and just throw a little bouquet towards TCC. I decided, because I had a friend getting married. I know this sounds very jet city, but it is not. A guy going to ORU who I knew from bar scenes, and that he's just like to hang out because it was a very restrictive environment, was introduced to a Czech tennis star by another friend of mine. They fell in love, and they got married in Austria, not Austria, Switzerland. And I was asked by my friend to go over. I didn't know I was going to be the best man. It was a surprise. I was standing in for someone who couldn't be there. And I said, you know, if we're going to Switzerland, I've always wanted to see Italy. Let's go to Italy. So I took a summer course at TCC. And now 30 years later, I've done probably 20 plus years in Italian study, because I love the teacher and I love the country. And people think I'm Italian. I'm not, I assure you. But I had people on the street walk up to me and ask me questions in Italian. Nowadays, I could answer them. So I just want to say this is something else that the community colleges can do. And I think the universities could, and they may need to, with the shrinking student base, reach out to adults who want more education and bring them in on, you know, adult only kind of programs, or so it's been something that's been very enriching to me. And I still have a Zoom class every Tuesday night, you know, in which we review Italian texts and talk about them. So
Wow.
sorry to get off on that. It's just
No,
one of my things about community colleges.
I love examples of these synchronicities too, where you have something and then like decades later, the impact of the initial thing comes
It's
bursting
amazing.
forward. It really is. And it's stuff that a lot of people don't even think like on the front of their head. It's just something that, seems offhand at the time and then develops into like a full-fledged passion. Um, I like the rural urban dichotomy that you mentioned earlier in terms of rural education and hearing those rural voices. Did you notice at your time there, I don't know if this breaches any like contract or like confidentiality, but a sort of trend in the grant requests from rural places versus urban places? Is there like I don't know if you can like, quantify the grants and the topics
I,
and stuff.
I wish I could quantify it, but it's been so long ago. I don't know, but I will tell you this: if we got a really sound program an underrepresented area of the state, I mean, it got a bullet. Didn't mean it if it was ill conceived or it wasn't a humanities program, like an art program. It wouldn't qualify technically, but we funded those. And gosh, I mean, it's just been so long. I apologize, but I know that we were very eager to solicit those, and the program director uh, during most of the time when I was there was David Pettyjohn, who now I believe chairs the Idaho Humanities Council. I mean, he's moved on and up and out, and he really worked actively. He went around, he solicited. He went to teacher meetings and community and acts, involvement stuff to try to pitch coming to the Oklahoma Humanities Council with your proposals, and it worked.
That's very, very interesting. I don't mean to like, pry your brain of an archaic part now, but do you happen to have any like very especially standout or memorable grant applications that really like, I don't know, seemed influential or very impactful compared to the others? Or is it really hard to choose because of the broad
Actually,
amounts?
I think of one that I thought was really important. I was very proud of the organization for doing it. Uh, the Smithsonian had a traveling exhibition for one of the Woody Guthrie histories, and it was they wanted it to go to the national, I'm not sure what the name of it is now, the National Cowboy Hall of Fame in Oklahoma City. And at that time, gosh, I'm just going to step on a lot of toes here. E.K. Gaylord, the owner of the Daily Oklahoman, who was extremely conservative, vetoed it. It was really what I was told. I can't say that that's exactly what happened. They turned it down because of the fact that Woody Guthrie was a lefty and a socialist. And our board actually found out about it through someone, and we went to them to said, would you please submit it to our board? And we actually were able to fund it. And we got it put into the old Supreme Court building, which was being renovated and vacant at that time across from the state capitol. And I thought that was one of I'll think of one more here in just a second. I'll tell you about it. I thought that I was very proud of that we did that because of the importance of Woody Guthrie to Oklahoma. We were also asked to fund a book about the memorialization of the Oklahoma City bombing. And this was controversial because almost everything about the bombing, the aftermath of the bombing was controversial and had to be done right. And we were quite aware that this book, which was about the process of the memorialization, could be controversial and could step on important toes. And in fact, it did. We didn't endorse the contents of it. We just helped fund it. And I'm still really proud of that. And I'm looking off to my left to see if I can see it on my shelf right now, because I keep my Oklahoma books together. No, not there. It must be upstairs. But we actually helped fund manuscripts from time to time, or get starter grants for planning. I know we also funded film grants, and I can't tell you what films they were, but they had to have humanities content. So those are two. The Woody Guthrie and the bombing memorial book are the two things that I stick out in my mind.
Well, the Woody Guthrie, was that a part of the museum on Main Street? Because that's what Smithsonian tends to refer to those.
I think this was a direct program of the NEH. I'm not certain it was part of the museum on Main Street. those were always really, really well done.
That seems to be a
I
lot
bet
of.
I bet we could find out if we had to, but I tend to think, you know, the NEH did programs through some of their initiatives like Museum on Main Street. Then they did some things directly themselves, and I just don't know. Sorry.
No, that's quite all right. I mean, I appreciate the thought. Going back to the precarious position that the Oklahoma Humanities is between the NEH and like a sort of charitable organization, did that ever become a conflict at some point? Did it ever like impede the process of getting grants to people or anything like that? Or has it been mostly a positive, place to be in the legal system as someone who doesn't know much about the legal system or how these things work?
Well, I will tell you that I think the answer was yes, it has from time to time. We during, again, give me the dates, during the Reagan administration, there was a distinct effort to defund the arts and the humanities as part of the federal government. And there have been repeated attempts since then. And we had to try to educate both of our senators, Nichols and Inhofe at that time, I think. He's been around forever, as you may know. He's really old, older than I am by far. And our funding was cut. And that was one of the reasons we had to start relying more on private funding and corporate funding and trying to get it from the state. But there was an educational process. I don't know if you remember him. He's now doing Cleartone commercials, but the former University of Tulsa football player turned representative, Steve Largent, he was in the NFL as well with the Miami Dolphins. He didn't know the difference between the arts and the humanities. And the source of the controversy at this time was the funding by the NEA, National Endowment for the Arts, of a film, I think it was filmed video of an image of Christ being dunked in urine. It's called Piss Christ. That was its name. You can imagine the controversy in the 70s over this. And so this was the outrage that caused the decision to and it really hurt the NEA. But the NEH fell into the bucket with it. We had nothing to do, the NEH had nothing to do with it, but we suffered for it and we had to really work. And, I'll say, I think Nichols is gone, from the earth now. He was always very sympathetic to the Humanities Council, even though he was conservative. Why? Because he knew, I think he was from Enid or Ponca City. No, he's from Ponca City. I think he knew about programs in the area. And it was easy to say, do you remember this library program in Blackwell or wherever? And he did. And so we had an ally that we could talk to, but that was pretty much it, because our congressional, on the representative side, none of them were interested in hearing from us. And so back in those days, maybe there still is, there was lobbying efforts. I remember having to go to DC and visit with representatives and who would listen to us. They would give us an ear and said, thank you, now go away.
This is probably an easy question to answer, but in your time, just across boards, just throughout your career, has the political, humanities sort of fields ever felt like a lot more friction than not? Or has it been relatively cooperative effort, or just somewhere in between?
I really worked hard to keep politics out of the Oakland Humanities Council. And I'm absolutely certain that there were, people who have moderate views, Republicans on our board. And I was just hell-bent to keep comity, C-O-M-I-T-Y, and not offend them. And I don't really remember, there were a few proposals that some people didn't like politically, but we were able to address the fact that we weren't there to judge the politics of the proposal, but the merits of it as a humanities project. So I kept us out of that to the best that I could. Now, with the local Planned Parenthood, as one party became anti-choice and the other became very pro-choice, we had some very wonderful, important, I'm not going to name names because some of them are gone, some of them changed parties, some of them are independent. We had a lot of struggle to keep politics out of the organization. And eventually the national organization decided to endorse a candidate. And that was the Rubicon that was crossed. And it made the local Planned Parenthood, which now has been absorbed. It's now run out of Kansas City. There was a political litmus test, which I always regretted. I really worked hard. I voted against as our representative to the national meeting in New York, I voted against that, but not because I didn't like the candidate they were endorsing, because I just knew it would drive away some of our supporters, and it did. So politics can intervene in these things. And folks that are interested in education and humanities oftentimes are more liberal, but not always. I mean, it's this is another one of those eye-opening things. One of my favorite professors at Rice, who I just was simpatico with, and went to his family home and talked and pontificated about stuff. When I finally read one of his treatises, I suddenly realized that he was advocating against for the Tory period at the time. He was advocating on the conservative side, and it was clearly that was his view about which side of history should have won in this particular area. I remember being stunned by it, and it opened my eyes to the fact that if you approach the humanities from a political ideology standpoint, you're on a blind end. You can do your politics through politics, but the humanities helps inform your political views, but the humanities is not itself a political tool. That's the way I feel.
I do think it sometimes gets tainted with political ideologies and slanted perspectives when it's, a much broader, much less, I guess, subjective kind of a thing. I guess it's relatively subjective, but not.
Well, I think anything can. I mean, and I think that good scholarship, if you have a political view and you're going to show it or talk about it, you should say so. And there's a really great at Rice. I did my independent study my third year in history on the history of slavery in the Americas, and oh my God, almost every single important work has a political axe to grind. It's a very political subject, and at this time there were two Yale professors who were arguing that the economics of slavery meant American slaves had a better deal than South American slaves, and it made the New York Times and Time magazine. It was a big brouhaha. But the work that I most enjoyed, and because I'm not a Marxist, but it was written by an openly Marxist British professor. It's called Roll, Jordan, Roll, and it was an anthology of slave songs and messages that showed how they coped with oppression. And so this is one example of, if you have a political ideology, you can still do good work. You just need to make it apparent on the surface, and he did. So
that's interesting little qualifier to add to a work, is like, I'm coming at it from this perspective in like a preface or something.
Well, I mean, it's like, sometimes you just have to Google their biography. Of course, when I was in college, you couldn't Google. Mm-hmm. And when I would find an insight into a poem that I was studying for an English class, my professor would be amazed that I could have done that. Whereas today, he would not be amazed because he would find it on the internet.
Yeah.
It must be harder to do good scholarly work with so much information out there.
Oh, the bar is set, I imagine, a little higher. Google as a verb just like cuts a lot of the work out of it, and sort of, I don't know, the averages.
Or you ask Siri, what was his political ideology?
Yeah, give me the background on. Like, he did it. What did Keats think about this topic? And she'll just tell you, and you're like, all right.
Like,
it is kind of crazy, and I guess that's a good transition to my next topic. And I'm going to focus a little less on the Oklahoma Humanities, because I understand this is a small part of your life, but it seems like there's a pretty overarching theme of community influencing and board membership and stuff. Have you noticed a trend in the humanities in your career, and like any sort of shift of focus? Because I know in history, it's like transnationalism has taken the, like, I guess, the zenith of historical scholarship. But have you noticed anything like that on the ground with grants or with communities and stuff like that?
Well, I think a development that really occurs after I leave is focusing on the lives of everyday people and people whose lives have not been discussed beforehand. Um, there's a little bit of that going on when I was at Yale. I mean, I read this book called The World We Have Lost, which was diaries of a 16th century poor woman. And I remember being just amazed and stunned by the fact that she didn't name her children until she had many of them until they were 6 months old, because so many of them died early on through disease, deprivation, poverty, etc. And so I think this emphasis on learning from the ground and not just the great men, if men, has totally shifted in the humanities. And I am not one of these people who sit back and say, "Oh, the pendulum has swung too far." What about the good old days? I just don't go there, and I sort of roll my eyes whenever I see that, mostly in commentaries and things. So I think I've moved sort of in that direction myself. I mean, I still read the biography of Truman, for example, or something like that. But I also am very interested, particularly, I guess, in cinema, of the lives of other people, because there's so much great work being done in that area. And film is that's one of those interesting arts or humanities. We, as I said, we did fund film scripts, but they were typically humanities projects, like the life of this great woman in the Renaissance kind of thing.
Yeah, like historical fictions or documentaries or something like that,
Yeah.
I imagine. And marginalized voices, I think, is a huge point of interest for historical research these days. Getting into continuing on these like abstract questions, how did you, while you are on boards, regard like a proposal by the humanities? Like, is there a rubric you have to follow to say like, oh, this does fit, this does propagate the idea of the humanities, or is it sort of just like a general feel?
Well, we actually had, I mean, this is going to sound overly simplistic because probably it was. We had a sort of a cheat sheet list of topics that had been traditionally considered to be in the humanities: philosophy, history, history of this, history of that, history of music, history of science. See science, history of religion, religion. See how all those rubrics. So we would look at this and decide a proposal and say, is it primarily performative or is it historical? And the Chautauqua was sort of an interesting example, because there, actors, scholars typically portray historical figures, but do it in their own words. They create a narrative out of some aspect of their life, which is purely performance art, and they perform it, which is art, but their scholarship is historical in nature. And because of the requirement that they speak in their voice and in their time, it created interesting discussions. I mean, when we would have a controversial figure who was an anti-Semite, for example, like Henry Ford, we allowed that. Of course, we needed to allow that to be vocalized in the person of the scholar as Henry Ford. We would tone the language down, to make sure that it was not going to cause people screaming and throwing things at the stage. But at the end of it, questions were then asked of the scholar as Ford, followed by questions asked of the scholar as themselves. And so that's how that became a humanities project, when its method of conveyance to the public is performance. So they do overlap.
That's really interesting. And what do you think, aside moving away from the rubric and into more of a broad sense, what do you think the humanities can contribute to these communities? I'm certain you've seen it firsthand. Like, what are the benefits of having an increased amount of humanities exposure, especially in maybe the rural areas of this state that people sometimes aren't subjected to?
I hate to go back to the old social uplift thing, but honestly, I do think that having an awareness of humanities pretty much everywhere for everyone can change their lives. I know it did mine. And I remember one of our professors, who was then an English professor at OSU, gosh, I don't know if I can do this without being too emotional. I mean, we were talking in one of we were asked, we did self-analysis why do you do this? What does it mean to you? And she basically said it helped her overcome the abusive situation she had as a child at home. She began to understand better. And so it helped her overcome anger. I think it creates understanding. We're in a very polarized society, and I have no illusion that that's ever going to change. I would love for it to someday, because I remember when we were not so polarized over some issues. There were always differences, but it was not a sense of polarization, us versus them. And I do think the humanities has the prospect, if not the reality, of helping bridge those gaps and giving some young person who's smart in a rural area, or bright or intellectually curious, the opportunity to learn things about themselves and about their world that otherwise they would not. So I'm a very big advocate of education, and it's probably my primary. And despite my personal orientations in a lot of ways, I steered my advocacy efforts away from health, political advocacy, human rights advocacy. I had many opportunities to do that. And maybe it was because I was closeted at one point in my life that I didn't. Whether that's the real reason or not, I still believe that all of those things, those areas can be improved with greater education. And I think our education gap in this country is really one of the root sources of our polarization. So
I would agree. I think you do tend to see trends across the country of states with high and low education and their overall takes and stuff like that.
You can look at a lot of different demographics, but educational level tends to be a pretty sharp one. From a sociology, social scientist standpoint, I think that's pretty clear.
I agree, and it tends to bleed into a lot of other aspects of the just being alive in this country. Speaking of education, and this is a little bit of a personal insert here, what advice would you give to students of the humanities, either at the bachelor level or people who are deciding whether to go into law? Because specifically history, a lot of people tend to say, well, are you going into law or graduate school? And do you have any advice for people sort of at these crossroads during their point in the education system?
Well, I always said, being an advocate for a board of visitors to, the humanities part of a university, you can take your undergraduate liberal arts degree and market yourself in a lot of different areas. You may need to do master's work in accounting or technology or whatever, but corporations, and I can tell you this is absolutely the truth, they want people who can think. They just don't want technocrats who are little robots who don't know how to survive in the real world. And I am actually a very big proponent of making sure that you are forced as an undergraduate to do different things. And, curriculum requirements change all the time. I can only tell you what it was like when I was an undergraduate. I mean, I was forced to take science and math, and I was really lucky in that my public high school segregated those of us who could do it, 35 of us. I mean, this is really awful that they did this in a way, but I mean, my curriculum at Edison High School my last year was Calculus 2, Advanced Physics, Advanced Chemistry, Independent Social Studies, French 6. I was doing college level work as an undergraduate, and I was able to pass out of the requirement at Rice to pass out of to take calculus your first year by taking an exam and showing I already did it. Because I was not otherwise strong in science. I had to dissect frogs, which I did not like, in biology at Rice. And the good news is that they also had a geology program that was really fascinating, but it was also known as rocks for jocks. And it was considered an easy A. And I don't think out of all the exams I took there that I missed a single question. It was perhaps the easiest day of all. So I mean, that's a little digression, but I think it's important that you have some skills. And I think getting a language, doesn't mean you have to be able to be fluent. Having a language is, my God, it's a window into another culture. Just the way they describe things and how the words they use and how they've changed, and etymology of words. And So I'm a big proponent of languages as well.
That's something I think a lot of humanities advocates tend to say, as good as many languages under your belt as possible. Not, like you said, not just because of its, like, resume fodder, but just because it does open you up all those windows. I think the last Oscars, the director who won it, the director for Parasite, said once you get over the inch tall hurdle, you open up another world. And I'm like, that's really
Well,
cool.
that's absolutely right. And I want to tell you the importance of, I think, having language opportunities in junior high and high school, which I don't know if that's possible in most public schools nowadays. I mean, I did have my 6 years of French and I did nothing with it. But when I entered Yale as a graduate student, I had to pass out at a competency level of 2 languages. And I really only had French, and I was able to hit the very lowest score to pass my French. And then I took German for reading over 2 semesters. Good God, German is really hard. But I didn't do very well in it, but I did enough. But what am I trying to say is that French that was in my head, which I'd never used except maybe one trip to Paris, was there. But that summer, when I was waiting to leave my law practice and go back to grad school, I pulled out my intermediate text and just did the whole thing real fast. And it came back. And as my penalty for doing this was I was put into a French social history class where all the reading was in French. And the graduate students, we had to like divide the work up because there's no way we could all do it. We had a chapter, each, and we would meet to discuss our conclusions, kind of thing.
Another, I guess, handicap that Google gives us is automatic, rough translations, but it's probably better than having to find a dictionary.
I sometimes in my Italian class, someone will come up with this beautiful translation of something, and the teacher will say, "Well, that was very interesting. Where'd you get that?" It was Google.
Yeah, historically unreliable.
Yeah, and Google is not very reliable in that stuff. And once you get into a language deeper, you find that my God, the word "to do" in every language has so many thousands of meanings. Google can't help you. So,
not the best philologist or anything like that. That wraps up my interview. If you have anything that you would like to say for archival evidence,
I would like to know, because I mean, obviously you're associated with OSU doing this for the humanities. Mm-hmm. Were you volunteered, or you were a volunteer? What is your path? Are you a graduate student or an undergrad?
I'm actually an undergrad. So I graduated high school in 2014, and I went to OSU for journalism about a year and a half. And then, financial stressors knocked me out, and then I got stuck with a bill. And so I paid about 10 grand out of pocket to get back into OSU. And I went to Northern Oklahoma College here at Stillwater for about a year until I got all of my, what do they call them, gen eds out. And then the 2016 election happened, and the state of journalism seems to be in a little bit of a disarray at the moment. So I figured, history. And since then, I actually graduate this semester. I willingly went to this internship because oral history, which is what we're doing now, seems to really, appeal to me in terms of you get the conversational aspect of journalism with interviews, but you also get to add historical archival evidence to the historical record. But again, going back to that question I sort of asked you poignantly, I'm not quite sure what the future is. I'm taking a gap year to, be youth in revolt in the Northwest with a brother. Yeah. But I think
I totally applaud you for doing that. The one thing I regret about my career was I moved too fast. Yeah. And with that accelerated program, I mean, I got wonderful benefits out of it. Ruth Ginsburg was my civil procedure professor at Columbia. So, cool stuff. But I was emotionally immature, and I needed the extra time that as an undergraduate. So give yourself the time to think and figure out what you want to do.
That's what I've noticed too, is in the gap years that I've taken, like coming back, there seems to be a gap in the maturity level of like the people through the K-12 straight to college and people who take some time to ruminate and experience life. But yeah, I don't know if this will be edited out or I'll just have this archival evidence for OSU for all of eternity, but I'm not quite sure. A lot of friends say that they think I would be a good lawyer, but a lot of people say that law school is a bit rickety. But it seems like, and another thing, just from interviewing you just now, the advocacy component of lawyership seems really appealing to me, because I feel like, truth be told, boiling down all of my desires, I'd like to make the world a better place, and it seems like you're more than proficient at doing that. So that's inspiring.
Well, let me just say this. If you really love to read and write and research, law is a good field. Otherwise not. This notion that you're in the courtroom advocating, no. I can count on one hand the number of times I've been in a courtroom. My actual area of experience or expertise is employee benefits, pension, profit sharing, 401k, doing deals, fixing plans. Very technical, very dry. And while I use all these skills that I have, you try reading the Internal Revenue Code if you can't get yourself through a complicated novel. You know, they're not germane in some ways. And so the things I have done outside of my practice are what keep me feeling, you know, alive, not the practice itself. And having been there since 1978, I am nearing retirement. That should be edited out in case anyone from my firm sees it.
I'll see what I can do in terms of editing. I do the transcription, but I'm not quite sure if I'm the one that's going to be editing this. But I'll see what I can do. But
well, yeah, go ahead.
No, I was just going to say that's very insightful. What were you going to say?
I was just going to say I think you've done a really good job, and so they can put this on the record, and you should get an A if you get graded for this, or an E for excellent. I don't know what they do nowadays, but it was really fun. Thank you.
No, yeah, and I assume if you don't mind, if I have any interest in the law school, do you mind if I email you personally, privately?
No, that'd be fine. My nephew, who was a computer science, then a philosophy major at OU, and it was interested in being going into law. And I had him come and sit in my office for a day, and he didn't do it. He went back to computers. I mean, he just saw. I said, you know, it's just, you know, I look at a screen all day, and all of my research is on the screen. You know, books don't exist in the world that I am in, and you have to be able to write coherently and talk coherently and think coherently and be careful. I made a mistake this morning, and, you know, one of my partners caught it, and I was mortified, you know, that I could make this mistake. It didn't actually have any substantive difference, but, you know, carefulness is something that you can cultivate as a student that will carry off into whatever practice you do. Nice. Wherever you go.
Yeah, I'll definitely take that. I think the room is probably going to kick us out at 2:30, so I believe this is a good point to wrap it up. But
yeah. But let me I will also say this is the first time I have on a jacket and a nice shirt since a year ago this time.
Oh, the work from home lifestyle, it does change wardrobes. That's what I've heard.
Oh my gosh, I have a nice sweatsuit that looks sort of dressy, and that's my usual Zoom outfit. But I thought if people say, oh, that looks so nice. I said, I'm in my pajamas.
Yeah, silk almost, it seems.
Well, I'm in blue jeans, but you can't see that, and tennis shoes underneath us. So.
Oh, I'm in a button up and I'm wearing shorts, so I totally understand it. It's what the camera sees.
Every tube, and you're wearing something. You know?
Yeah, exactly. Well, you have a wonderful rest of your day. Again, much appreciation for you.
You're welcome. I really enjoyed it. Have a good day.
Thank you. You as well.